Thomas Jordan, next year, he will have served as SNB president for 10 years. That is more than all the other SNB presidents before him, except for one. Also soon, the governing board will have had its longest time without a change since the 1960s. That's why we're asking the question, who will be next in the SNB governing board? We have the answers. This is the Geldcast Update.
Geldcast Update mit Fabio Canetg.
Let's look back first, April 1996, and that was the end of an era at the Swiss National Bank. Lusser, Meyer and Zwalen had led the SNB for 8 years. Zwalen and Lusser, they stepped down and Meyer became the new president. Since then, there has never been a governing board that has not changed for so long, but soon the current governing board with Thomas Jordan, Fritz Turbrück and Andrea Mechler will reach the 8-year milestone. Then it will be the governing board that has led the SNB for the longest time without any changes since the 1960s. Also, next year, Thomas Jordan will be the president that has led the SNB for the second longest time in the Swiss National Bank's history since 1907. The record holder is Gottlieb Bachmann, who was president of the SNB between 1925 and 1939. The following question is thus becoming more and more pressing. Who could be the next member in the governing board, and what are the international links that the candidates have? Let's find out. Candidate 1, Marlene Amstadt. She worked at the Swiss National Bank in the 2000s in the research department, and she was also a vice director in the third department at the Swiss National Bank. Then she went to Asia, where she worked as a counselor for the Bank for International Settlement. This is the bank which has its headquarters in Basel, but she worked in Asia, and she was also during that time a professor at the Chinese University of Hong Kong, where she wrote 2 exciting books, one about the financial market structure in China and one about CBDC, about the central bank digital currencies, which are very important going forward in central banking, of course. Currently, she's the president of the board of directors at the FINMA, which is responsible for financial stability. And I got to know her, Marlene Amstadt, at the university where she was my professor, and I found her fascinating. She seemed very smart to me, and I was under the impression that she was a woman with very strong opinions. And I think one big plus, if there was ever going to be a vacancy in the Swiss National Bank's governing board, for her would be that she's a person from the outside. Obviously, she's at the FINMA right now, not at the Swiss National Bank. And I think she would have great chances to become the first female president of the Swiss National Bank in its over 100-year history. Maybe one minus is that she might not have the greatest support of all the candidates from inside the SNB, which is obviously important. Candidate 2 is Beatrice Weder Di Mauro. She worked on her PhD at the University of Basel in the 90s. And also in the 90s, later, after she finished her PhD, she went to Washington. She worked for the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and also the World Bank. Then she went to Tokyo, where she worked at the university. And then she became a so-called Wirtschaftsweise. That's a member of the Economic Policy Advisory Board to the German government as a Swiss person, actually, in the 2000s, from 2004 to 2012. And today she's a professor in Geneva at the Graduate Institute and also the director of the Center of Economic Policy Research, CEPR, which many of you might know, which is based in London. CEPR organizes a lot of conferences about monetary policy around the globe. Lately, she has been doing a lot of research on the interlink between carbon taxes and inflation, a topic that becomes more and more important. Also, she thinks that central banks should do a lot more to fight climate change. By the way, you can find a link to a panel discussion in which Beatrice Weder Di Mauro participated on my Twitter profile at Fabio Canetg.
It's super hard to argue that central banks should not take climate change very, very seriously. And then
a big plus for her is certainly that she speaks a lot of languages, not just German and French and English, but also Italian and Spanish. Then she's experienced in policy. She worked for this group, the advisory board, Wirtschaftsweise in Germany. So she's not just a pure academic, and she has a massive contribution to the academic literature. That's very, very impressive. Maybe a minus for Beatrice Weder Di Mauro is that when the SNB last had a vacancy in 2015, she was considered as a candidate, at least in the media, but she took on another position during that time in the board of directors at the UBS. So some people might remember that for the bad of her. Candidate 3 is Martin Schlegel. He is kind of the superstar inside of the SNB. He works at the SNB at the moment. With only 33 years, he became the head of the foreign exchange and gold unit. That's very young. Then he moved on to Singapore, where he was the head of the Singapore branch of the SNB between 2016 and 2018. Since Singapore, the Swiss National Bank conducts foreign exchange interventions when it's night in Zurich. And he has a lot of experience inside the SNB. He worked in the first department, where he's actually now. He's the deputy of Thomas Jordan in the enlarged governing board. And he also worked in the third department. So the first department is responsible for economic policy. And the third department is responsible for monetary policy implementation, for example, foreign exchange interventions, which are obviously very important for the Swiss National Bank. Some people say that he has very strong ties with Thomas Jordan, who is the president at the moment, and that Thomas Jordan himself has really fostered Martin Schlegel's career. And I think that's a big plus if there's going to be a vacancy in the governing board, especially if it is not Thomas Jordan who is going to step down first, but for example, Fritz Zurbrügg. Martin Schlegel is very open and easy to talk to, so everyone loves him. Like inside the SNB, you cannot hear anything bad about him. His minus is if there's going to be a vacancy at the Swiss National Bank's governing board, that he's an insider. Obviously, he has worked at the SNB for quite some time now. And I guess that would be a minus because some people think that there's a lot to renew at the SNB, and for that, maybe an outsider would be the better option. Then we have candidate number 4. I think that would be Cedric T, who did his PhD in Princeton in the 90s with Michael Woodford and Kenneth Rogoff, which I find an interesting combination. Michael Woodford contributed a lot to the new Keynesian understanding of economics. That's the dominant view on how monetary policy works in central banks at the moment. And then we have Kenneth Rogoff on the other side, who is more of a conservative economist who thinks a bit differently about how monetary policy works and what monetary policy should do and not do. He's more on the side that monetary policy shouldn't do too much, I believe. So that's at least my reading of the two persons. And Cedric T worked with both of them, and he has made quite a career. Already in 2007, he became a professor in Geneva at the Graduate Institute, and he's a member of the Bank Council, which is kind of the supervisory board of the Swiss National Bank, comparable to the board of directors at a normal company. He has done a lot of research on international capital flows and exchange rate markets, and he has a very American view on monetary policy. That's at least my impression. That is, I would expect him to be more of a dove compared to the current members of the governing board at the Swiss National Bank. But of course, that's not too hard. They're pretty hawkish, I would say. His big plus is he's obviously a foreign exchange expert. He has written many articles, academic articles in journals about foreign exchange markets. His minus is that he is currently a member of the Bank Council, so that would be potentially complicated for the Bank Council to nominate him as a new member of the governing board. So that brings us actually to the big question: how does it work? How are you going to be elected into the governing board? Yeah, in this process, it is really the Bank Council that is sitting in the driver's seat. I think the Bank Council is comparable to the board of directors at a normal company, and the Bank Council nominates someone for the vacant position in the governing board. And then the Swiss government, the Bundesrat, elects someone formally. The nomination is not binding. That is, the Bundesrat could elect anyone with a Swiss passport and the skills to lead the Swiss National Bank. But of course, it would be interpreted as a political insult against the SNB if it did not elect someone from the list of the Bank Council. So that really makes me think that the Bank Council has a lot of weight in the process of finding a new member for the governing board should there ever be a vacancy again. I'm sure that we will be having the discussions about potential replacements candidates in, let's say, not the super duper very far distant future. And lucky you, since you have listened up to here, you will be having a head start in all these conversations. Please let other people know if you like this show or share it on social media. Do not forget to tag me, then I will reshare your post. That's it from my side for today. Thanks for tuning in. My name is Fabio Canetg, and this is the Geldcast Update.